The wind was sharp in King's Landing that morning. Ned Stark stood in the Tower of the Hand, staring at the Red Keep below. He hadn't slept well, not since King Robert died. Everything was moving fast, too fast. Cersei was watching him. Littlefinger kept whispering in his ear, and the city smelled like rot and lies. But Ned Stark had something most others didn't: honor and secrets. He held a letter in his hand, one he had written last night. It was for Stannis Baratheon, the true heir to the Iron Throne. Robert's children, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, they weren't really his. They were Jaime Lannister's. Ned knew the truth, and now it was time to act. But something had been bothering him more than that. Jon Snow, the boy he raised as his own. The one he never told the full truth. Not even Catelyn knew. Jon wasn't his bastard. He was Lyanna's son, and Rhaegar Targaryen's. If the wrong people found out, Jon would be dead in a heartbeat. Ned had always thought hiding the truth was the safest way. But now, with Robert gone, Cersei's power growing, and war coming, maybe the truth could save more than it would hurt. That morning, Ned made a decision, one that would change everything. He sent 2 letters, one to Stannis and one to Winterfell. The letter to Winterfell was for Jon. "Come to me," he wrote. "There is something you must know." But the game in King's Landing waited for no man. The day Joffrey tried to claim the throne, Ned stood before the Iron Throne with the King's Guard all around him. Littlefinger leaned close and whispered, "Now's the time to kneel, Lord Stark." But Ned didn't kneel. Instead, he turned to the court and said, "By the will of King Robert Baratheon, and the truth written in his hand, I name Stannis Baratheon, the true king of the 7 kingdoms." Gasps filled the hall. Joffrey's face turned red. Cersei screamed for the guards. But Ned had planned for this. He wasn't alone. Sir Barristan Selmy, disgusted by Joffrey, stepped forward and stood beside Ned. Varys said nothing, just watched. And then Renly Baratheon entered with a dozen men from the Reach. Chaos broke out. Swords were drawn. But Ned wasn't captured this time. He lived. He left the Red Keep alive, with a broken alliance between the Baratheons and the Lannisters, turning the city into a battlefield. Stannis prepared his fleet. Renly ran south. The War of the 5 Kings still began, but with one major difference. Ned Stark was alive, and he was heading back to the north with the biggest secret in Westeros burning inside his heard to in the dungeons of the Red Keep. Ned had read letters from Maester Aemon, and pieces of Rhaegar's writings kept in old records. All of it pointed to one thing: Jon wasn't just Rhaegar's son. He was legitimate. A true Targaryen. His name was Aegon Targaryen. If that truth came out at the right time, it wouldn't just shake the realm. It would tear the throne from every liar and place it in the hands of someone who actually deserved it. Not Joffrey, not Stannis, not even Daenerys across the narrow sea, but Jon Snow, his nephew. His son in all but blood. The North needed to know. Jon needed to know. And Ned Stark wasn't going to die with that truth in his heart anymore. He was going to crown the true king. Jon sat alone in the cold dark of Castle Black, the wind howling outside like a ghost that had forgotten how to sleep. He had read the letter 3 times, 4 even, but the words still didn't feel real. "You are not my son, Jon. You are my blood, but not my shame. You were born of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen. Your name is Aegon. You are fire and ice both." His hand trembled. Jon had spent his whole life thinking he was a bastard, a Snow, an outsider, raised by Lord Ned, loved but never truly accepted. Not by Lady Catelyn, not by the world, and now here it was. The truth. A name heavier than any sword he had ever held. Aegon Targaryen. He stared into the flames, trying to find himself in them. But all he saw was chaos. Was this some trick? A mistake? Some madman's lie? But it wasn't. He knew Lord Stark. The man didn't lie, especially not about this. And the letter, it was written in his hand, sealed with the direwolf. Sent by Raven, carried with urgency, marked as truth before death. Jon felt his throat tighten. Why now? He muttered aloud. Behind him, Sam entered the room, holding a few scrolls. "Another raven from the south," he said quietly. "Lord Stark is alive," Jon spun. "What?" Sam nodded, eyes wide. He escaped the Lannisters. There's word of war in King's Landing. Renly's in the Reach. Stannis is marching from Dragonstone. And Ned Stark, he's returning north. Jon's mind raced. If Lord Stark was coming back, if this was real, then everything was about to change. He looked down at the letter again. I did not tell you sooner because the world was not ready, but I fear it may never be. Come to Winterfell. You must hear this from my lips. Jon folded the parchment slowly, as if it were a blade, and tucked it into his cloak. I have to go, he said. Sam's face twisted in confusion. Go? Jon, you're a man of the Night's Watch now. You swore an oath, Jon nodded. I did, but the wall will still be there. Winter will still come. But if I am who he says I am, his voice cracked, then I can't just sit here in the dark, swinging a sword at shadows. I need to know who I am, and what I'm meant to be. Sam swallowed hard. You could be killed, Jon. If the Lannisters find you, if anyone finds out, then they'll kill a Targaryen, Jon said quietly. Not a bastard. For the first time in his life, Jon didn't feel like nothing. He felt dangerous, important, like his blood mattered, like maybe his life had weight. He left the next morning before the sun rose. Ghost padded silently at his side, the white direwolf as loyal as death. Jon rode hard and fast, using hidden roads, avoiding towns. The north was quiet, but not safe. Winter was still coming. When he reached the neck, he was met by Stark riders, men loyal to Ned, who had survived the purge in King's Landing. They recognized him, bowed to him, called him my lord, and one even whispered, he told us to call you. Your Grace. Jon felt his stomach twist. Don't, he said. But deep down, something had already begun to change inside him. He was no longer just a watcher on the wall. He was a flame in the snow, a shadow of dragons, a boy born of rebellion, and maybe the only one left who could unite the realm before it tore itself to pieces. At Winterfell, the gates opened for him, like they had been waiting, and standing in the courtyard was Lord Eddard Stark, alive, greyer, but strong. When Jon dismounted, he didn't bow. He didn't speak. He just stared at the man who had raised him, lied to him, protected him. Ned stepped forward, eyes full of sorrow and pride. You came. Jon's voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? Ned looked at the sky like the gods might forgive him. Because I didn't want to lose you. They stood in silence for a moment. And then Ned said quietly but firmly, It's time, Jon. The realm is burning. They will kill each other for that throne. We can't let them. I will tell the world who you are, Jon shook his head. And what then? Ned looked him in the eye. Then you'll take your place. As king. Jon didn't sleep that night. Winterfell was colder than he remembered, even though the fires burned strong in the great hall. The warmth of the stones did little to fight off the chill that crept into his bones. He stared at the hearth, the flames dancing, echoing the war inside him. Aegon Targaryen, king by blood, outcast by choice. He didn't want a crown. But it seemed the crown had already started reaching for him. Down in the courtyard, northern lords were arriving, quietly, carefully. They weren't just coming for Ned Stark. They were coming for Jon. Word was spreading faster than they could contain. Ned Stark returned from death. The bastard of Winterfell rides with a direwolf and dragon blood. The North may have a king of its own now. By dawn, the whispers had turned to chants behind closed doors. The White Wolf, the true heir. Not Stark, not Snow, Targaryen. Jon stood on the battlements, watching the snowfall. Ned joined him, dressed in his heavy black furs. He looked more tired than ever before. I told them you were back, Ned said quietly. But they came for more than a reunion. Jon glanced down at the men gathering. They want war. They want justice, Ned corrected. Justice for Robb, for Catelyn, for the blood spilled by Lannister gold and Southern lies. And you're the banner they need, Jon turned sharply. I'm no banner? No, Ned said. You're a sword, a Targaryen blade tempered in northern snow. And I fear you may need to be drawn. Before Jon could answer, Maester Luwin arrived in a rush, scrolls in hand, eyes wide with fear. "A raven from Dragonstone," he said. "Stannis Baratheon marches north. He demands loyalty. He knows you're here," Jon blinked. "He knows? He knows?" Luwin nodded. "He knows who you are. Or at least, he thinks he does." Jon looked to Ned, whose jaw clenched. "How?" Luwin hesitated. "Varys the Spider. He's begun sending ravens to allies across the sea. He's naming Jon the rightful heir." Ned swore under his breath. "Damn that eunuch!" But Luwin wasn't done. "And there's more. One of Daenerys Targaryen's ships was seen off the narrow sea. She's crossed. She's coming." Jon's stomach sank. "She'll come for the throne." Ned nodded slowly. "She thinks it's hers." Jon stepped back. "Then I'm a threat." "No," Ned said. "You're a rival." They both stood silent. A cold truth between them. Westeros wasn't big enough for two Targaryens. Just then, the door to the Great Hall burst open. Sir Roderick entered, face pale. "Lord Stark! Jon, you need to see this." They followed him to the hall, where a man was bleeding on the floor. His clothes were burned. His hand was missing 2 fingers, and clutched in his uninjured hand was a message. "I rode from King's Landing," the man gasped, "to warn the North." Ned knelt beside him. "What happened?" The man's voice cracked. "The Lannisters. They've allied with the Reach. Tywin has taken Riverrun. He knows Ned Stark lives. And now," he coughed blood, "they're coming for Jon Snow, alive or dead." Jon felt the cold settle deeper in his chest. It had begun. He turned to Ned. "I won't sit here and let others die for my name. I'll ride south. Meet with Stannis. Stop this before it gets worse." Ned shook his head. "You'll do no such thing. If you ride now, you'll walk into fire. Let me speak to the lords. Let me prepare the North." Jon's voice hardened. "You raised me to be a man. Now let me act like one." Ned looked at him, not as a boy, not as a bastard, but as a man forged by war, raised by wolves, and born of dragons. "I didn't just raise a man," Ned said finally. "I raised a king, and then—" The horns blew, 3 long blasts. Jon and Ned froze. Was the sound the Night's Watch only used for one thing, White Walkers? But they weren't at the wall anymore. They were south of it. The dead were marching, and now the Game of Thrones had more than just kings to fear. The horns still echoed in the hills long after they stopped blowing. 3 blasts. Not 1, not 2, but 3. Jon's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just an old tale anymore. The White Walkers had passed the wall. They were coming south. He rushed to the battlements with Ned close behind. The sky was dark and cloudy, the wind bitter and strange. A few Night's Watch men, riders who had fled the wall, arrived at the gates of Winterfell, half frozen and near death. "The wall has fallen," one of them croaked. "East Watch by the sea torn down. The dead are coming." Ned's face turned grey. "How many?" "Too many," the man whispered. "An army of thousands, marching in silence, eyes blue as winter stars. And at the front, a giant with no face." Jon clenched his fists. This was no longer just about thrones and crowns. This was the end. And yet, even now, men were still preparing for a war of politics instead of a war for survival. Later that night, the Northern Lords gathered in Winterfell's hall. They spoke of alliances, of Jon's blood, of crowning a new king. Jon sat at the edge of the hall, silent, distant, half listening. They argued over whose house would command what. Who would ride south? Who should kneel to Stannis or not? It was all noise to Jon now, until Lady Maege Mormont slammed her hand on the table. "Are you all mad?" she growled. "The dead are marching. They don't care if you call him Snow or Targaryen or king. They'll kill us all the same." "She's right," Jon said, rising. His voice was low but full of fire. "I don't want a crown. I didn't come back to rule. I came because Lord Stark said the truth mattered, that the realm needed unity. But you're all still playing the same games that killed Robb." The room fell into silence. "I don't care about the Iron Throne," Jon continued. "But if we keep fighting each other while the dead march, there'll be no one left to sit on it." His words settled over the room like falling snow. That night, Ned visited Jon's chambers again. "They're afraid," Ned said quietly. "Not just of the dead, but of you." "Of me?" Jon asked, confused. "They see your blood. Stark, Targaryen. They see prophecy." Fire and ice. They wonder if you're Azor Ahai reborn, Jon scoffed. I'm no savior, just a boy who never belonged. Ned shook his head. That boy is gone. The realm made you a man. Now the gods might make you a king. Before Jon could answer, a raven arrived from the south. It bore a dragon's seal. It was from Daenerys Targaryen. She had landed on Dragonstone. She knew Jon's name. She knew the truth. Her message was short and cold. I am the last dragon. You are my nephew. We are not enemies. Unless you claim my throne, come to me, or war will come to you. Jon's face went pale. Ned took the letter from his hand, reading it with narrowed eyes. She knows everything, Jon whispered. She was always coming, Ned replied, even before she knew you existed. Another raven came the next day, this one from the south, Stannis Baratheon. The north must bend the knee, or burn with the rest. I will not kneel to dragon spawn or bastards. Choose wisely, and as if the gods themselves wanted to test Jon's bloodline. The weather turned colder that night. Snow fell thick, the flames in the hearth burned blue, and from the edge of the forest, one of the scouts returned with shaking hands. We saw them, the scout whispered. The dead, just 2 days away, and not just whites, but walkers, on horses, silent, watching us. Jon stared out the window at the falling snow. South of him, dragons circled the skies over Dragonstone. East of him, Stannis sharpened his sword. West, the Lannisters tightened their grip. And north, death approached. He turned to Ned. We have to unite them, Jon said. Daenerys, Stannis, everyone. Ned looked hesitant. That may be impossible. Then I'll try the impossible, Jon said, voice hard. Because I won't let the world end over a bloody chair. And that night, a raven left Winterfell with Jon's seal. 1 letter went to Daenerys, 1 went to Stannis, and 1 to the Night's Watch. Hold the line, Jon wrote. I'm coming. The waves crashed hard against Dragonstone's black shores as Jon Snow stepped off the boat. Sea spray soaked his cloak, but he didn't flinch. He looked up at the castle carved from obsidian, jagged like dragon bones. Its towers lost in fog. 2 dragons roared overhead, their shadows sweeping over the cliffs like wings of death. Jon didn't look up. He had faced the dead. He could face a Targaryen queen. At his side rode Ser Davos, calm but wary. You sure about this, lad? She might not want peace. And she's got teeth, Jon gave a cold smile. So do wolves. Inside the hall of Dragonstone, the air burned warm with firelight, but the tension was ice-cold. Daenerys Targaryen sat on her throne of carved black stone, cloaked in silver and crimson. Beside her stood Tyrion Lannister, hands folded, eyes sharp. Grey Worm and Missandei flanked the room like statues. When Jon entered, the guards reached for swords, but Daenerys lifted her hand. Let him speak, Jon bowed stiffly. Your Grace, she didn't return the courtesy. I've heard stories, she said. A bastard from the north. A boy who rose in the watch, who now claims my bloodline, and sends ravens like a king. Jon met her gaze without fear. I claim nothing, but the truth is what it is. Truth? Daenerys said. The truth is, I've spent my life earning every inch of power I've gained. And now I'm told a man I've never met, raised by wolves, has a stronger claim than me. Forgive me if I'm not ready to bend the knee. I didn't come to ask for your knee, Jon said. Or to take yours. Tyrion stepped forward, smiling faintly. Then why are you here, Jon Snow? Jon looked at Daenerys. Because the dead are marching. And if we don't stand together, you won't have a throne to sit on. She laughed softly. You sound like my brother Viserys, always talking about shadows and destiny. Do you know how many men come through these doors speaking of doom? I've seen it, Jon said. I've killed them. White Walkers, whites. The Night King is real. Eastwatch has fallen. The room went silent. Daenerys looked to Tyrion, who looked unsure. She turned her eyes back to Jon. And what do you expect me to do? March my armies into snow and ice while Cersei sharpens her knives. Jon took a step closer. I expect you to choose what kind of queen you want to be. The kind who rules over ash and bone, or the kind who fights for the living. There was fire in his voice now. The wolf had teeth. Daenerys rose slowly. You speak of loyalty, of truth. But you ride here with a name that threatens everything I've bled for. If I accept your claim, I risk everything. If I kill you, it's all mine." Davos stiffened beside Jon, reaching for his sword. Jon didn't move. "I'm not your enemy," Jon said, quiet but steady. "But I won't kneel to someone who'd kill their kin over a throne." Daenerys's eyes flared. "Kin? You're my aunt," Jon said. The words hit the room like thunder. Even Tyrion blinked in shock. Daenerys's face twisted, half fury, half confusion. "You lie." "I wish I did," Jon said. "Ned Stark hid it to protect me. Rhaegar and Lyanna were married. I was born at the Tower of Joy." Tyrion stepped forward, voice low. "If this is true, then you both share the same blood." Daenerys looked like she had been stabbed. "All my life," she whispered, "I believed I was the last. The last dragon. The last hope, and now you tell me it was all a lie?" "No," Jon said. "I'm telling you, you're not alone." The silence that followed was thick and painful. Finally, Daenerys turned her back. "Leave me." Painful. Finally, Daenerys turned her back. "Leave me." Jon didn't argue. He walked out, cloak trailing behind him. Later that night, Tyrion found him standing on the cliffs. "She won't trust me," Jon said. "She will," Tyrion replied. "But it will cost something." "What?" Tyrion looked at him carefully. "Your crown." "Or hers?" Jon didn't answer, but that night, as he looked into the stormy sea, a rider arrived at Dragonstone with another raven. It was from Winterfell. The dead had reached the north. A village near Last Hearth had gone silent. A trail of frozen bodies left behind. Children, old men, flayed and reanimated. The Night King was marching faster than anyone thought, and Winterfell would be next. The wind howled louder than before. Snow fell like knives as Jon Snow rode through the Wolfswood, his black cloak heavy with frost. Ghost ran beside his horse, silent and alert, white fur glowing in the dark. Winterfell rose ahead, tall, proud, but surrounded by fear. The dead were close, too close. He had ridden through the night after Daenerys agreed to help. Not with full trust, but with fire. Her dragons were coming, her unsullied march north. But the cost? She wanted to rule afterward, alone. Jon had made no promises, not yet. As he passed through the gates of Winterfell, he was met with panic. Families packing wagons, archers on every wall, fires lit in every tower. But even fire couldn't warm what was coming. Arya was the first to greet him. She looked thinner, sharper, more dangerous than ever. She didn't hug him, just stared with those quiet, Stark eyes. "You came back," she said. "I always do," Jon replied. She handed him a black cloak stitched with silver thread. "The north is yours." "Even if you don't want it," Jon didn't answer, because deep down he feared she was right. Inside the hall, Sansa sat in Ned's old chair, her face pale but firm. She looked like a queen already. At her side stood Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, and others. She rose when Jon entered. "You've seen them?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "How many?" He swallowed. "Enough to wipe out every house from here to King's Landing." The room fell into dead silence. Sansa nodded slowly. "Then we fight. With what we have. We'll have more," Jon said. "Daenerys is coming." That name twisted the air like a knife. "Dragons." Someone muttered. "Yes. And what does she want in return?" Sansa asked, voice colder now. Jon hesitated. "She wants the throne." Sansa's lips tightened. "And if the North survives, do we get to choose our fate? Or are we expected to kneel again?" "I didn't kneel," Jon said firmly. "I asked for help, not chains." But even as he said it, he felt the weight of Daenerys's eyes on him in his memory. The fire, the ambition, the need to rule. Later that night, the horns sounded again. But not for ravens, not for visitors, for war. A scout burst through the gates. "Half dead, half frozen. They're here," he gasped. 2 miles out. They move at night. Thousands! Jon's blood turned to ice. He ran to the battlements, looked through the falling snow, and there they were, figures in the mist, standing still, watching, a wall of death. No sound, no breath, no mercy. Among them a pale horse stood tall, and atop it, like a nightmare wrapped in black ice, the Night King, his blue eyes locked onto Winterfell like he had been waiting centuries to reach this moment. And then The wind shifted, a deafening roar split the sky, flames lit the clouds. A dragon, no, 2 dragons. Daenerys had arrived. Riding Drogon, her hair whipping in the storm, she came down from the sky like fire itself. Rhaegal followed, wings spread wide. Jon's heart twisted at the sight of him. Blood calling to blood. Daenerys landed inside the gates, Dragon shaking the ground beneath his claws. She stepped down, armor gleaming, eyes scanning the frozen field beyond the walls. "They're beautiful," Sansa muttered beside Jon. "And terrifying," Daenerys walked to Jon. "We burn them before they freeze us," he nodded. "Then let's begin." At sunrise, the horns blew again, not for warning, but for war. Archers climbed the walls. Unsullied lined the field. Northern bannermen stood side by side, with men from the Reach, the Vale, the Stormlands. It was a sight Westeros hadn't seen in centuries. Rivals united, not for gold or glory, but for survival. Jon walked through the ranks, his sword at his hip, Ghost padding silently beside him. He stood atop the walls and raised his voice. "I am Jon Snow. I am Stark by blood, Targaryen by fire. But more than that, I am a man who has faced death and lived." The crowd hushed. "We stand here not as lords and ladies, not as kings, but as the last line between life and the long night." He drew Longclaw. The steel shimmered in the weak morning sun. "We fight together, or we die alone." A roar rose from the army below. It was time. The dead began to march, and above them, on the other side of the field, the Night King raised one pale hand, and Viserion, the undead dragon, screamed into the sky. Mouth dripping blue fire, fire against fire, ice against blood, and Jon Snow, standing in the center of it all, knew one thing. This wasn't just a battle for Winterfell. This was the war to decide the fate of the living. The first wave came like a flood of shadows. Thousands of whites, snarling and silent, poured from the tree line toward Winterfell's walls. Their eyes glowed blue, their mouths twisted in hunger. They didn't scream. They didn't run. They just moved, fast, unstoppable, like the night itself had come alive. The archers fired. Flaming arrows rained from the towers. Dozens of dead fell, but dozens more kept coming. Catapults launched barrels of wildfire across the field, green flames exploding in the dark. Screams, both human and not, echoed through the storm, and then Drogon swooped down. Daenerys rode him through the night like a goddess of fire, hurling death at the undead lines. Drogon's fire scorched entire columns of whites into ash. Bones cracked. Ice melted. For a moment the tide seemed to turn, but then the cold came. Viserion, the undead dragon, screamed from the sky, ice blue fire ripping through the battlefield. It melted stone, shattered shields, and sent men flying like leaves in a storm. His wings blotted out the stars. Rhaegal met him in the sky with a thunderous roar. The 2 dragons collided mid-air, claws and fire tearing into each other. Twisting and spinning in the blizzard, Jon watched from the walls, his sword trembling in his grip. He had to act. He couldn't sit on the wall while men died for him. He mounted a horse and rode out, leading a group of Northmen and wildlings straight into the chaos. Ghost ran ahead, slashing through the dead like a white blur of fury. Arya moved like a ghost in the shadows, blade flashing, face cold and unreadable. She didn't fight to live, she fought to kill. Beside her, Gendry was covered in blood, swinging his warhammer, shouting her name as she disappeared again into the smoke. But even as they fought bravely, something was wrong. Jon felt it. The wind changed, and then he saw him, the Night King, walking through the battlefield as if none of it mattered. The flames bent away from him. The whites moved aside, forming a path. He held a spear of ice in his hand. His armor shimmered with frost, and he looked directly at Jon. Jon dismounted, breathing hard. This was it. He walked toward the Night King, sword drawn, heart pounding. But before he could reach him, the Night King smiled and raised both arms. Jon screamed, "No!" But it was too late. The dead began to rise again, every man who had fallen, every ally, every friend. They rose with blue eyes and empty hearts. Jon watched in horror as the body of Ed, a Night's Watch brother, stood again, now a puppet. The Northmen began to panic. Chaos broke out inside the walls. Daenerys, still flying, saw Jon surrounded. She screamed his name and dove down with Drogon, fire spraying wide. But Viserion came again from the clouds and slammed into them mid-air, knocking both dragon and rider from the sky. Jon turned just in time to see Drogon crash in the forest outside the walls, Daenerys flung from the saddle. He ran, heart in his throat, but before he could reach her, a whisper came behind him, a cold voice, one he never thought he'd hear again. "Is this the king you chose?" Jon turned, Stannis Baratheon, alive, but not alone. His sword was drawn, and behind him rode men from the Stormlands, but they weren't helping, they were attacking. Stannis had betrayed them. Winterfell's gates were open, too open. Sansa had warned Jon about trusting anyone. Now he saw it too late. In the middle of the battle with the dead, Stannis had chosen to strike the north from behind. "We made a pact with the living," Jon growled. "Sword raised. I made a pact with power," Stannis said. "And I will not lose my kingdom to a boy who doesn't even want it." The North was now fighting two wars, the dead in front and the living behind. Sansa stood on the tower, watching fire and ice consume her home. She turned to Maester Luwin, voice shaking, "Send the last raven. To the Vale, to Dorne, to anyone who will listen. And what shall I write, my lady?" She looked out at the chaos, eyes burning with tears. "Write this. Winterfell is falling. The bastard king has been betrayed. The living fight alone. We need fire. Oh, we will all freeze in the dark. Fire. Oh, we will all freeze in the dark." The night screamed. Winterfell, once the heart of the north, now stood on the edge of death, caught between two armies, one of frozen corpses, the other of broken oaths. Jon Snow fought in the mud, blood coating his sword, breathing like a man already half dead. Every swing took another white down. Every step was harder than the last. He couldn't see Daenerys. He couldn't see Arya. He couldn't feel his fingers. But he kept moving toward the forest where Drogon had fallen. A trail of blood and broken branches led the way. Smoke rose. Snow burned. Then he saw her, Daenerys, limping, holding her side, blood on her lips. Drogon was nearby, barely breathing, wing torn open, steam rising from his wounds. Jon rushed to her. "Can you ride?" he asked. She looked up, pain in her eyes, but nodded. "Where is he?" You didn't have to ask who she meant. "The Night King's near the Godswood." Her eyes darkened. "Then that's where it ends." Together they moved through the chaos, past flaming corpses and broken walls. Jon carried Longclaw. Daenerys carried only rage. In the Godswood, beneath the Heart Tree, the Night King stood alone. As if he were waiting, Arya arrived first, bloodied, silent, her blade gripped tight. "You came," the Night King said, not in words, but in something deeper. Her voice felt in the bones, not the ears. Jon stepped beside her. Daenerys followed, 3 Targaryens, 3 fates. The Night King raised his hand, and Viserion descended from the clouds, ice fire dripping from his jaws. It was a trap. Jon shouted, "Move!" Viserion's frostfire hit the Heart Tree, shattering bark and turning ground to glass. Arya dove. Daenerys screamed. Jon charged forward, swinging at the Night King, but Longclaw bounced off his chest like it was air. The Night King grabbed Jon by the throat and lifted him. Jon gasped, kicking, slashing blindly, but the cold was eating his strength. The Night King pulled him close, eyes burning blue, as if to say, "You are nothing. Not king, not savior, just another corpse to raise." Then a flash of steel. Arya. She leapt from the shadows with a war cry. Valyrian dagger high, but the Night King was ready. He caught her by the throat too. Daenerys screamed, and then she did something mad. She ran toward Viserion, toward the undead dragon. Jon broke free just in time to see her mount him, the creature that killed her own dragon, her own people, and stab a blade deep into his frozen neck. Viserion roared. The Night King turned in horror, and as Daenerys screamed something in Valyrian, the dragon's fire exploded, not ice fire, but real fire awakened by her blood. Viserion went wild. Fire bursting from his mouth in all directions. Arya dropped to the ground. Jon ran for Daenerys, but it was too late. The flames consumed her. Drogon roared from the distance, as if feeling her death. The fire hit the Night King, but this time he didn't walk through it. He screamed, he burned. The magic that kept him alive broke with a sound like shattering glass, and with it, his army fell, all across the battlefield. The dead collapsed, silent, motionless, free. The snow stopped falling, the wind stopped howling, and Winterfell, what remained of it, stood in shocked silence. Jon crawled through the blackened snow to where Daenerys had fallen. Her body was still, one hand stretched toward the godswood. Toward a throne she would never sit on, Arya knelt beside Jon. She ended it, Arya whispered. She died a queen. No, Jon said. She died saving the world. The survivors gathered what they could. Rhaegal limped. Drogon cried. The North buried its dead. Stannis was found near the walls, burned alive, crushed beneath a crumbling tower. His betrayal was over before it could begin, and when the ashes settled, the people gathered in the courtyard, broken, bloodied, free. They turned to Jon. He looked nothing like a king, torn cloak, hollow eyes, no crown, no smile, but the people knelt. Sansa came forward, eyes full of steel. The realm needs someone who didn't want the throne, who fought for the living, not for power, Arya added. Someone who lost everything and still stood. Even Tyrion, bruised and quiet, said, "If not him, then who?" Jon didn't speak. He didn't want the throne, but maybe the throne wanted him. Weeks later, in the ruins of the Red Keep, Jon stood in the great hall. The Iron Throne had melted in Daenerys' fire. Nothing left but ash and stone. Jon turned away. He crowned no one. Instead, he returned north, past the wall, past the ruins, into the wild, with ghost, with no crown, only peace. Because sometimes the best king is the one who walks away from the throne.